All right, the true challenge of inflation is that so few people know what it is. All right, this is John Tammy writing in Forbes, Dateline February 21st, 2021. Radio Garden is a website that can be accessed through Google or in an app form through a supercomputer in your pocket. This thing. It allows you to explore live radio by rotating the globe. In other words, if you're interested in what they're saying in Russia, Moscow, you can listen to broadcasters there very clearly. But you can also listen to Moscow, Idaho broadcasters or anywhere else you want with a worthy internet connection. You can do all this for free. Contrast with this how things were 100 years ago. It was the 1920s that radio became a thing. They were very expensive must-have gadgets. RCA was the Apple of its day by virtue of bringing to market what for the time was a technological marvel. So what happened in the last 100 years? How is that 2021 crystal clear radio connections from around the world cost nothing, but radios that broadcast very few local stations very badly were so expensive in 1921? The truth is economic growth. Economic growth isn't consumption as economists and other media enablers tell you. Rather, is consequence of investment. Investment springs from unspent wealth, which means there is more wealth created the more investment there is. Thanks to copious investment over the last 100 years, the cost of communicating has plummeted, and so has the cost of accessing information from around the world. Curious what's on the mind of radio hosts in Sydney? Just turn on your computer. It's that simple. When capital that is always and everywhere a consequence of activity is matched with talent, productivity subsequently increases and prices fall. Hold on just a second. I want to say before you scream bloody murder, have you seen the price of cars lately? Check this out from the New York Post. Tiger Woods was calm and lucid when Los Angeles fire officials pulled him from the mangled remains of a luxury SUV on Tuesday. And is very fortunate to be alive following a rollover crash, officials said. This was international news, of course, but the next paragraph wasn't and is bigger news. Deputy Carlos Gonzalez, who arrived at the scene shortly after the rollover, said, "It is very fortunate that Mr. Woods was able to come out of this alive. I think this also kind of speaks of the marvel of modern automobiles and that they are much safer than any we've ever previously seen." Think about that next time someone complains because a minor accident totaled a car. Yes, those old steel and chrome Cherries of the 1950s survived being T-boned, but its drivers did not. And that's from Don Server. And I'm just a big fan of Don Server's blog post, so you should follow him. Anyway, and that's growth because we are safer driving today than we were before. And some of that costs more money. That's a fact. But at the price of our lives, I'll take any day of the week. All right, but wait a minute. Let's see this. All right, so the savings left over after we meet our unmet needs relentlessly rush the future into the present. Economic growth is all about falling prices that we enjoy alongside progress. Huh? But wait a minute, some will say. Economists believe that booming economic growth causes economies to overheat, with inflation the result. A couple of people at the New York Times contend that economic growth has a downside. According to the reporters, too much growth causes overheating. And yes, inflation. In the defense of each, this cracked me up right here, it could be that they're just being polite. Hey, you, big boy. Figure that their B is frequently the Federal Reserve and the Phillips curve dominates thinking inside that central bank. It's accepted wisdom inside the Fed that the economic growth causes prices to rise because of the Phillips curve. I can't believe we're still doing the Phillips curve. All right, let's see. For one, there's no stimulus to begin with. Governments only have money to spend insofar as they arrogate to themselves a percentage of the growth that's already taken place in the U.S. economy. Translated for those who need it, the economic growth already occurred, hence the $1.9 trillion for Congress to redistribute. This won't be 1.9 plucked from Pluto or Mars, rather it would be 1.9 trillion taken from one set of pockets and placed into another set. Yep. Which means ultimately it won't be 1.9 million in new consumption, as much as Congress will depress the stimulated to the tune of 1.9 trillion in order to stimulate the depressed. Yeah, exactly. So they're saying, hey, we're going to take from you so you can't spend to give to those guys so they can spend. And as they're depressing the stimulated, i.e. the people who earn, to give to the people who are not earning. Now, in this case, I'm very sympathetic with the people who are not earning because it's not their freaking fault. And then let's not forget that demand begins with production, which is why economies can overheat. For there to be 1.9 trillion in consumption, there must be 1.9 trillion in production. Again, the demand side or the supply side. We got to supply it to produce it for you to demand it and to consume it. It has to be supplied first. These things balance, not to mention that the only closed economy is the world economy. Even if the output gap economists obsessed were real, there would be no consequence in an economically interconnected world. After Worth is worth restating that actual economic growth is a consequence of savings and investments that render the individuals who comprise any economy quite a bit more productive, which is why economic growth is a sign of falling prices. Individuals don't overheat. By extension, economies don't. Still, economists have conveyed to these idiots of the New York Times that inflation is what follows growth, and that fighting it is some brutal slog. Oh boy, hold on a second. You don't want to hear it. All right, writing about new Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in the aforementioned A1 article from New York Slimes, they somewhat fawningly reported that Yellen spent the bulk of her career fighting in a war against inflation that economists have been waging for more than a half century. Battle scars for Yellen? Suffering? Of course not. Back to reality. Inflation is a choice. So is a lack of inflation. There's no fight about it. After World War I, Germany faced war debts and reparations that its political class didn't want to pay back. So they foisted on the citizenry by devaluing the mark. By 1923, a dollar bought 4.2 trillion marks. The devaluation was a choice. So was the currency reflation. When Germany decided the devaluation was a disaster, it ended within a week through a revision to currency price stability. Inflation is devaluation. Exiting inflation isn't a war or a long, brutal battle in some imaginary battlefield. Ending inflation is as simple as monetary authorities reversing currency devaluation. And you could say, well, isn't that what they're doing with the stimulus? Yeah. But the stimulus is taken from Peter to pay Paul through a government intermediary, so all the friends of Nancy get paid. But at the end of the day, just how do you explain Japan? Just explain Japan. You can't, man. Because when you're spending from this guy, you're taking productive assets to give to this guy with an intermediary. So you're taking a buck from him, only 50 cents to go on that guy. It's not inflationary, man. It's just not. I mean, if you start freaking printing crazy money like the Germans did, maybe. And are we doing that now? I mean, is a dollar worth $4.2 trillion today? No. In short, Yellen's fight has been an imaginary one. It was the 1970s where there was a devaluation, when Nixon, intent in severing the dollar's link to gold. The devaluation of the dollar was decade-long, which is why the stock market and economy stagnated in relative sense. Investors are buying future returns in currency when they invest, but the 1970s dollar policy was all about a shrinking of the unit. In the 80s and 90s, the malaise-filled dollar policy that had defined the 70s was reversed. The economy and stock market boomed. This wasn't a fight, it was just a change in policy. No doubt there's a lot of mythology about what Volcker did, but it's just that, myth. It's rooted in this Phillips curve misunderstanding that says growth causes inflation. So in that case, we don't want any growth, right? No, we want minimized growth, have minimum. That's freaking stupid, man. So lack of inflation must be about central bank engineered contraction. Nonsense. This misnamed Volcker recession was in reality a sign of growth as wealth moved out of inflation hedges. Think land, rare art, commodities, and rare stamps and back into actual investment. They blamed the 1970 inflation on consequences like increases in wages and an oil embargo. Of course, to blame inflation for rising prices is like blaming wet pavement for rain. The reporters reverse causation. The dollar was devalued in the 70s, which meant the wages, hey buddy. Yeah. The dollar was devalued in the 70s, which meant wages denominated in soggy dollars crept up as dollars were exchangeable for fewer goods. As for the oil embargo, no. Arab oil flowed to the U.S. just as much after the embargo as before. Rising oil prices were the consequence of the falling dollar, which is what the Nixon administration wanted, man. They wanted that. I mean, if you have if your dollar is devalued, it makes your exports economy. That's what exports economy want. They want a devalued dollar. This is pure economics 101. You want to have more exports, you devalue your dollar. Unfortunately, we are still the strongest dollar, so we can devalue it. Other countries just follow suit because they want to export to us. We're the biggest consumer in the world, which is why, thankfully, Trump is taking advantage of it, unlike the idiots that run the country now or before him. Let's see. All this speaks to the problem with inflation today. Few know what it is. It's currency devaluation, which means there's no inflation fight to speak of. Just don't devalue, but if you're devaluing, stop. Reverse course, and Asian inflation will cease. All right. That's it. Stop worrying about, oh my goodness, we're going to have the dollars only be worth pennies. I'm buying Bitcoin. It's just silly. I will see it.